Welcome to the DRF Sports Podcast, brought to you by DRF Sports. America's most trusted name in horse racing is now providing sports bettors with exclusive data, analytics, previews, videos, and expert picks on all major sports. Bet smarter and have more fun doing it. It's the DRF Sports Podcast, and now your host, Sheldon Alexander. Ready, set, bet.
This is the DRF Sports Podcast, episode 80. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander, and we are 3 games into the conference finals with the Heat leading the Celtics 2-1 and the Warriors up 3-0 on the Mavs. We continue to roll here on the pod. On our last episode, we gave out Game 2 picks with 2-0 record, bringing our totals to 36-26 against the spread in the play-in/playoffs and 48-30-1 against the spread in my NBA picks overall. More on that in a sec, but first, hey Iowa, DRF Sportsbook is sending all parlays to the moon. Start cashing in with DRF Sportsbook's 22% profit boost for all MLB, NBA, or NHL parlays. The MLB season is here, and along with the NBA playoffs and the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs, so it's time to celebrate, and we want to boost your profits. So head over to the DRF Sportsbook now and start betting. Must be physically present in Iowa to wager. So coming up, more on the NBA Conference Finals, including our Game 4 picks in both the East and West, plus a deep dive into the Stanley Cup playoffs, a little bit of golf talk sprinkled in. We got tons for you with our guy, Matt Russell, and luckily for y'all, that starts right about now. Well, it's a lovely Monday morning, and hopefully our first guest, our only guest, our special guest, as always, is doing a whole lot better than Luka Doncic after getting baptized by Andrew Wiggins. Our guy Matt Russell joins us on this lovely Monday morning. How are you doing, my dude? Are you doing better than Luka? I hope so.
I'm good. I had no idea Andrew Wiggins was the designated soul sucker. The absolutely reach down into the depths and tear it directly out. Yeah. I mean, I guess you have to immediately think that that's an offensive foul because that couldn't possibly be just sort of a regular play that happens in the NBA. But luckily,
refs are going to ref, man. Refs are going to ref. Yeah, that's what we've learned.
Absolutely.
During these NBA playoffs, the refs are going to ref. Like, imagine that. But like the funny part here, not to go off on a tangent 2 minutes into this, but the funny part to me is imagine just being a human being, period, right?
Yeah.
Seeing that play in front of you and having your first reaction be like, nope, not fun, not allowed. Good stuff, fun stuff, exciting stuff. Nope, not allowed. Offensive foul. That is bad. Nope, we can't do that. Not allowed. Yeah, like, I can't fathom that world. Like, how is that your first reaction? It makes no sense.
You'd think that he like roundhouse kicked him on the way to dunk it, the way that he called that offensive foul. Everybody's sitting around going like, what? And then of course Luka just trying to bleed the call out after the fact, wanted a review on the review or something. Like, what are you doing?
I mean, basketball IQ for Luka. Imagine that, like, to think that quickly in midair, realizing that you're about to get dunked on, to be like, oh no, I got to flop.
Yeah,
that is pretty insane as well. Just such a weird night in the NBA, and these conference finals continue to just get weirder and weirder because even when people think they know what they're talking about, it's still not happening exactly in that way. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. We'll get to that for sure. But I know you had another interesting weekend with some other stuff going on here that we should check out before we deep dive into the NBA. Do I have that right?
Yeah, man. Well, we talked about it last week, PGA Championship, right? And something that seemed really uneventful and seemed like it was just kind of go by this weekend, you know, on a busy weekend. Listen, there was a horse race, I suppose, in the Preakness Stakes. There's, of course, Major League Baseball stuff, tons of different stuff going on. And, you know, in certain weeks, the golf world sort of rises up and something incredible happens. In some weeks, nothing really comes of these major championships. But you and I had a good talk about the PGA Championship last week. And so I just wanted to sort of recap that because that was, you know, it was a wild one. That was the biggest, it turned out to be the biggest and most interesting event over the course of the weekend. So luckily we were able to cash live with a Justin Thomas live bet. And it was really just an example that I wanted to follow up with, because it was an example of why we live bet golf versus, sort of putting all of our eggs into one basket before a tournament starts. Because, I listened to him talk about, his week after the fact, and he was talking about how on Wednesday he was basically lost. And he's like, I'm talking to Bones. I'm talking to my dad / his coach. And he's just like, I can't really figure this out. And so if we were sitting there talking to Justin Thomas, if we were privy to those conversations on Wednesday, there was no way we would ever bet on Justin Thomas on Wednesday, right? Like when the player himself is down in the dumps and doesn't have that level of confidence that you would need to beat 155 plus other guys. So this expectation in betting on golf that we're just supposed to put our card in before the tournament starts, and like that's supposed to be it, and we'd sort of just win, lose, or draw at that point, like has never really sat well with me, because we're pretty early on when it comes to golf betting relative to these other sports, right? People have been betting on basketball, people have been betting on football, to a lesser extent hockey, obviously, even to a longer extent baseball, for a really long time. We sort of figured out like how it works as far as, okay, point spreads and like what you need to succeed, and how you can, anybody can say, okay, I went 54% against the spread. Like that's just sort of this understood level where you can have success. Well, what does that mean in golf? Like, what is that level? What is that supposed to look like? Is it supposed to look like, 1 out of every 20 tournaments, I actually nailed an outright win, and because that winner was better than 20-1, then all of a sudden I'm profitable? Like it's really hard to sort of construct what being profitable in golf betting is. And so I've tried in my work in the last year or so to just sort of make people understand, like, you don't have to get sucked into the whole like winning outright type of thing where, you and I talked about how I'm like, I like a Hideki Matsuyama, Colin Morikawa, et cetera, et cetera. And if like that was the only betting I was going to do, like those guys were blown out of the tournament basically after the first day. But the good news is like we have an opportunity to learn from the first few rounds, et cetera, et cetera. And so Thomas, he ends up on the bad wave. And what that means for those who sort of weren't paying attention or whatever, but like part of golf is obviously understanding the weather, and part of golf handicapping is understanding who's going to get the benefit sometimes of weather patterns. And so Justin Thomas, he was on the bad side. And a lot of our guys that we talked about for top 20s were on the good side of the wave, which meant they were just sort of naturally, on average going to shoot like 1 to 2 strokes better per day, just by the time of day that they teed off on. And so we were able to look and see that Thomas was playing in this bad wave, but playing really well, a pair of 67s on Thursday and Friday. And that's sort of led you to believe, okay, like of this leaderboard of which like he's kind of the only one who teed off in the afternoon Thursday and then the morning on Friday. It's kind of the only one left of that half of the field, excuse me. And so you go, okay, like even though he's 4 shots back going into the weekend, he's playing the best. And then Saturday rolls around, and sort of the disappointing thing for him. And again, if we had talked to him after his round on Saturday, if we had been privy to those conversations, he's again lost in the sauce. He's having like high level conversation with his caddy Bones on the range. And he's just like completely lack of confidence because he played pretty poorly by his standards on Saturday. And so you get into Sunday, and that's where the other element of all of this comes in. Experience, right? A lot of these guys can play. And when, you talk about Mito Pereira as a rookie coming into this tournament, rookie on the PGA Tour has a little bit of a different definition than any other sport, right? Rookie means, okay, it's just your first time on the PGA Tour, but you have had to battle way harder than any first round draft pick in the NBA or in the NHL or whatever. You've had to battle through because in golf, like it's up to you to qualify to the next step, right? So you don't just get invited because of potential into the PGA Tour. You have to earn your way in. So, a guy like Mito Pereira, who's 27-year-old rookie, like he earned his way in. And of course, then we get the backstory, how he was like basically a junior legend in Chile and like better than Joaquin Niemann, who's been on the PGA Tour seemingly forever and all of that sort of stuff. And so you look at it and you go, okay, but the one element is experience and having done it before. And so you look above Justin Thomas on the leaderboard. And honestly, like I got in at 9-1, and that was by no means the best number over the course of the weekend or even from before. But looking back at it, you go, yeah, I want a 9-1 bet. Like imagine what kind of money line, what kind of bet we would have to make on a money line for a 9-1 to cash. And we just get into this attitude in betting golf that like, oh, if you didn't get the best of the number, if you're not hitting a 25-1, or in Mito Pereira's case, he was like 150-1, 200-1, like then it's somehow not worth it. And it's like, well, you know, you can wake up on Sunday with a game plan from a betting standpoint. You can wait and see how these guys ahead of Justin Thomas, Mito Pereira, Matthew Fitzpatrick, Will Zalatoris, Cameron Young, and a couple other guys who hadn't won a major, who hadn't even won on U.S. soil yet. You can sit and you can wait and see how those guys are going to react. And so once Thomas had, I think he was like 2 under for his round, nothing crazy, but, you know, 10, 11 holes in, we get information by watching the event. And we're watching these guys ahead of him, frankly, all just kind of stink, right? They all are just kind of barely moving it around. A lot of bogeys, a lot of par saves that are like just hanging on. And for everything that happened on the 18th hole yesterday with Mito Pereira, like a lot of what he had built at that point through Sunday was some incredible par saves. And the good news is for him, like, that's awesome. But when you're not making comfortable pars, that's a sign of weakness, unfortunately. And so with 6 holes left for Thomas, and I think there was probably 9 or 10 holes left for the leaders, you just look and you go, these guys are slowly coming back to the pack here. And if Thomas can make one or two more birdies, now I thought he would need to get to -6. I thought he needed to make that last putt on 18 to get to -6 to get into a potential playoff. I didn't know. Listen, Mito Pereira left a putt on the lip on 17. And if he had made that, now we're talking about a guy with a 2-stroke lead going into 18. And I don't think he attacks his drive on 18 the same way that he does if he's got a 2-stroke lead. So like these things are entirely just completely thin line margin type deals here. So, all in all, as we sort of go through this in relatively new terms, because, golf betting got really sort of big out of the pandemic because golf was kind of the only thing that we could bet on, at least in North America. It's this type of thing that like we have to understand. We don't know like what we're doing as far as like how we're supposed to separate bets, how we're supposed to attack things, what the different attitudes that we're supposed to have for betting. I'm a big guy on top 20s, right? We talked about a handful of guys. And if you listen to this podcast, you read my stuff, like you probably had a really good weekend because we hit a bunch of top 20s. I mean, that leaderboard that I just mentioned, right? Zalatoris, Fitzpatrick, Cam Young, those are all guys you and I talked about to hit for top 20s. And those guys are really comfortable top 20 winners at, pretty significant prices, plus 200s, plus 300s. The same thing, Max Homa, Taylor Gooch, we hit on those last week as well. So, whether you're getting in on the Dustin Johnson missed cut and you're cashing a little bet on Friday, or, whether you're able to hop in live on a couple of different things. We also had a Cam Young, that 14 to 1. He ends up getting tied for the lead at one point. So like, that's a good bet right there. Now he ends up going, double bogeying late in his round on, I believe it was 16. And you just go, okay, like that was a really good bet. We picked out a guy who was way off the pace to get, basically into the lead. And yeah, it fell apart with a couple holes left. So as long as you're making good bets, like don't worry too much about what the odds are and like compare them to, oh, I should have had this earlier. I should have got this. So if you're making good bets and you're doing so, eye test, metrics, all of those things combined, that's the way you got to do it. And the last thing I just want to sort of mention is way less to do with betting and why golf is so interesting and fun and cool as far as like being a golf fan. Mito Pereira's got this big lead and everybody's cheering against him because whether it's wanting Justin Thomas to sneak in, having more familiarity with Will Zalatoris or Matthew Fitzpatrick, who's been around for a long time and has won a bunch on the European tours and still hasn't won in North America or on, US soil. We're all sitting around going like, I don't really know anything about Mito Pereira, and golf fans want history. right? When we watch these major championships, we're all hoping like this guy adds to his resume, or this guy does this thing or that or whatever. And it's like somebody that we know, somebody that we're familiar with, maybe Jordan Spieth, right, adds another major or this, that, or whatever. And Justin Thomas is in that category, but Mito Pereira is a guy that like nobody's ever heard of, right? I should say nobody, obviously, but like most even casual golf fans have never heard of. And he's 100th ranked in the world. And nobody wants him to win because nobody's bet on Mito Pereira, right? He is the zero on the roulette wheel, that if the ball lands on zero, everybody's money get wiped out, right? The black, the red, the even, the odds, everybody's money gets wiped out if Mito Pereira wins. So he's sort of just this guy who's like, yeah, we can just throw him to the wolves here. And if he loses, we'll all be fine with it. But then something like that happens to him yesterday. And now, next time, everybody now knows who Mito Pereira is. And maybe we've bet on him. Maybe some, people are more likely to bet on him, but they're certainly more likely to cheer for him next time around, because it isn't, oh, who is this Mito Pereira guy? I don't even know who this guy is. Now we've got the backstory, right? The relationship with, Joaquin Niemann, the history and whatnot of obviously like having a kind of catastrophic finish to that tournament. And now we're cheering for Mito next time, right? So it's a lot different than any other sport where you just go, okay, like I don't like the Yankees, I'm cheering against the Yankees. I want bad things to happen to the Yankees now, and I want bad things to happen to the Yankees tomorrow and for the rest of time. I'm just using them as an example because it's frankly easy. Mito Pereira now is going to be a fan favorite. And so while he lost the tournament, he still made a handful of dollars in finishing what I guess it would have been third. But he's also got a ton of fans now the next time that he's in contention. And if you watch that guy hit golf balls this weekend, you know that he will probably be in contention again. And just impressive 71 holes from him that at least now he's on everybody's radar, which in the golf universe, that actually means something.
Yeah, wild weekend in golf for sure, and a wild weekend in a bunch of sports as well as the NBA as we continue to roll along here on the pod. Just talking a little bit of NBA action as the conference finals continue in both the Eastern and Western Conference. And last time we spoke, a little housekeeping here on the pod, 2-0 on Monday's pod, 36-26 against the spread, play-in/playoffs. 48-30-1 against the spread and NBA picks overall. And when we switch gears to the NBA, we got to start with what happened last night. Even though, we give out game 2 picks was the last time we spoke. Game 3, though, of the Mavs and Warriors win game 3, 109-100 to take a 3-0 series lead in the Western Conference Finals. And the last time we spoke, first off, game 4 is Tuesday. Get that out of the way. Game 4 is Tuesday. Mavs favored by 1 in that game. And it's funny. Last time we spoke, we were talking about this series being over. I thought, the Mavs, it's just the NBA. It's a lesson of the styles make fights in the NBA playoffs, right? And matchups are matchups. Sometimes the matchups are just not good. And I thought the series was over. I didn't think the Warriors would sweep, but watching 2 more games and hearing a lot of the post-game chatter where J Kidd is talking about, oh, this is a bigger moment for us. This is just the beginning. I'm like, y'all are in 1-2-3 Cancun mode, down 3-0 right now. And the Mavs should have the game where they just shoot the lights out in game 4 because you'd expect it to come at some point, but right. I just have to take the Warriors here just because, again, if they play the standard game that we've seen through the first 3 games of the series, the Warriors should win this game and the Warriors should be sweeping. So give me the Warriors +1. But as we look at what happened in this series, right? And I'm not the hindsight, told you so, whatever. That's not what we try to do here on this pod, but it's the Mavs offense, right? After watching game 1, it was just the Mavs offense is just all Luka ISOs and threes. And if the threes aren't there, it's a wrap for them. Meanwhile, the Warriors, which I find super interesting, right? The Warriors are the team that brought on this whole math game of we beat you with threes, right? And yet they're the team that, okay, even if we're not getting threes, we can get 21 and 10 from Kevon Looney. because they adjusted and just take the twos. And I think that's been the most interesting part of watching this series play out is we talked about Steve Kerr and the great job they did game plan wise, knowing that the Mavs are going to try to chase them off the line and the Warriors being okay with that. And in fact, like hunting that, like I've never seen Steph Curry and Klay Thompson drive to the basket so much and so freely and so consistently at any point of this whole Warriors quote unquote dynasty run. And that's been super interesting to watch. And when this whole series flipped in game 2, right, you got the Mavs up crazy going into that game where the Mavs, what did they lead in that first half? It was 72-58 in that first half. And then the Warriors just kept chipping away. And they didn't try to get the home run balls, like 38 points in the paint in the second half. That's just them going to the paint. And overall in that game, again, we're going back to game 2, 62-30 advantage points in the paint. And that's exactly what we were talking about. If the threes aren't there, the Warriors have a different way to get buckets. Whereas the Mavs, the threes slowed after 15 threes in the first half of game 2, finished with 21. And they lost. Imagine shooting 21 threes in a game and you lose with Luka also putting in work, right? Like that's when it's like, okay, it's a wrap on this series. Good job, good effort from Luka and company though. And I think, part of J Kidd, he's right. Nobody expected them to be in the conference finals this year, realistically. Right. Sure. And so it's a good run for the Mavs. And I guess we'll start here. My question to you is, as we look into game 4 and it is Mavs -1, what do you think of that line with everything that we've seen so far? But also, do they have enough in them to at least push this to a game 5?
So, I mean, that I'm never going to be like, I shouldn't say never, but, it's hard for me to just be like, that do they have enough in them is like this evaluation of each one of them on this sort of like existential level, right? Like within their, like, did Andrew Wiggins actually take their soul? And the answer to that is, of course, maybe, right? Like, I mean, we don't know, right? Like the answer is always maybe. And that's why I root a lot of what I do in like metrics and analytics and stuff like that, because it's like, okay, I want to know not what I sort of think, because I spent a decade plus of my life betting on like what my eyes told me and what and then my biases seep in, right? Because like, it's funny, I'm sort of shifting gears here in the middle here, but I'm looking at the NHL playoffs, Stanley Cup playoffs, and seeing some tweets from people, and you're just like, do you understand how much of your own personal bias are going into the things that you say, and the bias being like what you thought going into the series, right? And that's the thing that my big takeaway in all of this, and it's my takeaway a lot of the times, is like you have to avoid just like falling into your bias. And there's another situation in the NHL that we'll talk about here in a second. But as far as this series goes, like the last time you and I talked was after game 1 on Thursday. Game 1 was earlier in the week, but like when we talked, it was Thursday. And I was, I was saying to you, it's like, I'm very interested to see what the shot quality numbers is. I always go back to the shot quality because it is some of the best predictive stuff that we have when it comes to basketball. And sure enough, we finished the podcast, and a few hours later, our friends over at Shot Quality like tweet out shot quality upset. In fact, that Dallas had the better shot quality in game 1. And so I go, okay, like I'm a lot more comfortable with betting Dallas +6.5 for game 2. And what happens? Well, the same thing happens, Shell. Like the shot quality again was in favor of Dallas. The thing is, they made them all, as you mentioned, in the first half, and then they didn't make any of them in the second half. And your point about the Warriors is incredibly, salient, because the patience that it takes for a team like the Warriors, who could try to get back in a game by just firing up threes left, right, and center, the patience for them to just be like, no, we are just going to take easy 2 over and over and over again and hope that the Mavericks sort of cool off. And the Mavericks ended up shooting, like you mentioned, they hit 21 threes. They ended up shooting in the high 40s percentage-wise in that game. But it's because the water had to find its level, right? They were well above 40% for much of that game, and it slowly dwindled down because the Warriors are like, all right, let's just keep playing. Let's play some quick possessions. Let's get these quick twos and add, more possessions. Now, you have to point the finger at the Mavs in that fourth quarter. They gave up 43 some odd points to lose that game outright and not even cover. Right. And so would I make that bet again at +6.5? I absolutely would, because the Mavericks, largest, lead was 20 points in that game. And the Warriors' largest lead was 8. Right. And I was getting 6.5 points. That's a bet that I would make over and over and over again. Again, the shot quality in both those games. So as much as we look at, Luka and how, again, the other credit to the Warriors is they are defending Luka better than the Suns ever did. They are defending everything else that's going on, which is, everything is tangential to Luka, right? They're defending all of the other guys a little bit better, but not so good that the shot quality isn't very high, relative to the Warriors for the Mavs, right? And so, part of it is, I haven't looked at, I haven't seen what the game 3 shot quality is. That would be really interesting, but I'm looking at a box score right now that has your man's Reggie Bullock, 0 for 10 last night. Right. And it's okay, I suppose there's a way in which we should predict an 0 for 10 from, whether it's Bullock or somebody else.
Kleber,
whomever, right?
He sucked too.
He sucked too. And it's okay, is that predictive, right? Or is that predictable? And that's just a really pretty significant outlier type performance in the negative for both of those guys. Mm-hmm. And, really rough beat for those who had Dallas first half. We obviously have, everybody has to mention the game 3 down 0-2, return home, right? That line, the game line was -3. The first half line was -3. Dallas looked like they were, pretty comfortable, midway to late into that second quarter. But the Warriors just keep coming. They just keep coming, right? And so the fact that Kerr defensively, and whom, obviously I say Kerr, I mean the coaching staff at large. I'm not necessarily positive that Steve Kerr was, putting together defensive reports. They're doing they're doing enough to sort of, I'm not even really sure what they're doing. They're just doing enough to have the shot quality not matter. But the shot quality numbers still exist. And now this number goes down to -1 because everybody does have that same feeling that you have, that frankly, I would, hesitate to disagree with, as far as, in the NBA, when you go down 0-3, you're not coming back. And so it's easy to just sort of pack it in. And that's the element that we are just guessing on, because for every team that calls 1-2-3 Cancun, there's a team like the Raptors who wins the next 2 games, or even just the next 1 game. And that's all the market's asking of the Dallas Mavericks here. And so, again, from an objective standpoint, I look at it and I go, okay, the Mavs had better shot quality in game 1. They had better shot quality in game 2. I think they probably had better shot quality in game 3. We'll have to see. And I just go I'm supposed to bet on the Mavs in this situation, now that we're again getting these 2 points. And the problem is the Mavs have worked me over these past previous 3 games. And so do you have the intestinal fortitude to play another hand, right? Or do you just walk away from the table? Because there are tons of stuff to bet on that we don't have to just keep firing away on this Mavs team. So I realize that doesn't really tell you all that much. It's, to me, more, I walk away well before I would play the Warriors, for example. But I'm just not necessarily tripping over myself here to bet on the Mavs. This series is better left probably as a sunk cost, if you will, for those of us who have been backing the Mavs. I know that you have been backing the Warriors, so you are in a lot better shape as far as the profit loss statement is concerned for this series.
No, I think one thing that you said though that was super important was in our preview of this series, I thought the Mavs could give the Warriors a go. And you talked about being able to watch and adjust. And, after game 1, I came back and I was like, whoa, no. The Mavs are not going to give them a go. This is a wrap. And I think that's a thing of learning and watching and just, okay, well, what's the issue here? Like, what really is the adjustment that the Mavs can have here? And you mentioned, like Brunson is getting buckets, Dimwitty got buckets for them. And if it wasn't Dimwitty, then maybe it was Kleber in another game. But like, the thing is, it's like, you're not gonna, like, it's the Mavs and the guys that we're talking about here. Like, anybody could have had Spencer Dimwitty, right? Like, anybody could have Maxi Kleber, right? Anyone could have had Reggie Bullock, right? Like, we're not talking about, Steph and Clay and, even Wiggins or, just dudes with a more of a resume. And then also just add in pedigree. Yeah. And then also just add in again, like the coaching. And I think, and this part, I have no idea whether this is the truth or not. Right. But I just found it's very interesting listening to Jason Kidd and hearing him talk about, they did the third quarter interview. Right. And shouts to Allie LaForce, like asking a real question, but she was like, the box and one, like how much does that do you think, does that throw you guys off the box and one? And Jay Kidd's like, actually, that helps us. We keep getting wide open looks. We just got to knock them down. Yeah. And to me, it makes me wonder, is that the star player mentality as a coach, right? Like if you're Jason Kidd, you're used to being a star player and you're thinking the next shot's going in. Right. And like, that's why you're a star player. That's why you were a Hall of Famer. But in the reality of the game, it's like, okay, cool. Do we need Reggie Bullock going 0 for 10? Do you know what I mean? Like, that's my mentality from the outside being like, yo, at the end of the day, you're Reggie Bullock. Right. So like, where's, and I'm not saying I know the answer to this. I'm asking like, where is the line here? Right. And it's funny to think, and I'm sorry, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but I was just watching JJ Redick and Tim Legler, right? Legler was on JJ's podcast and Tim Legler was talking, JJ Redick was joking about how he probably came along in the NBA 5 years too soon, right? In terms of just being able to let it fly. And Legler's laughing because he's like, dude, how many games did you have where you shot like 10 threes in a game? And Redick's like, I probably did that a bunch, blah, blah, blah. But this is just how the NBA is now. Mm-hmm. And I get that. And I understand that. But like, you're going to try to beat the Warriors like that? Like, that's not a recipe for success. Like when you really see that and like, you're coming with Reggie Bullock and Maxi Kleber and Davis Bertans to like beat the Warriors in a 3-point shooting contest with Steph, Clay, Jordan Poole, Wiggins, like that just didn't make sense. And then when you watch it play out, you're like, oh yeah, that's why this doesn't make sense. Like it's just a bad matchup.
Sure. But I mean, a lot of that is hindsight, like you have to admit, because like they were killing them in game 2 and it took the Warriors doing, like, I think that comeback was a lot more about the Warriors than it was the Mavericks, because the Mavericks right now, because of the lack of depth. And it's funny, right? Like when Bullock is 6 of 11, everything's fine, which he was in game 2. Now everything didn't end up being fine for, other reasons, right? But when he's 6 of 11, he's putting up 20 points. It's like, oh, you're getting stuff out of, you're getting stuff out of Reggie Bullock. When you're getting nothing out of Reggie Bullock, and part of that's the point, right? Is that these guys are going to have high and low type thing. But you and I talk about the supporting cast, like you're supposed to shoot better at home than you are on the road. So when we're talking about predictive elements, like that's actually an outlier kind of on both sides, right? If the Warriors hadn't come back and won that game, you'd be sitting here going like, man, I never would have seen a Reggie Bullock 6 of 11 performance from him on the road, because we have this attitude about these role players, right? And like we brand different guys that like, it's honestly, it's a lot like the golf conversation, right? Like Mito Pereira can't get any credit until Mito Pereira gets some resume, gets some credentials. And like maybe a couple better shooting nights here for Reggie Bullock. And 2 years from now, he's getting a little bit more credit. He's getting like, he's being revered like Robert Horry or some of these other like, supporting cast guys who you would never like pick to start a team. But it's like, oh yeah, this guy's in the playoffs every year. And like, yeah, he's a problem, right? Like obviously the guys, the Pat Beverleys of the world sort of bring it on themselves as far as the attention is concerned. But like history is littered with guys who just like show up, PJ Tucker on Miami, right? Obviously a different element. We're not talking about shooting. We're talking about doing all this, the Jay Crowders that were like, you know, you become that guy who's like mid-level exception guy that everybody's like dying to have on your team. And like, you can't become that guy until you be that guy. Mm-hmm. And so after game 2, you're looking at Reggie Bullock being like, yeah, maybe this is that guy. And now in game 3, because he misses all these shots, you're like, okay, he can't be that guy. But like, they got to the Western Conference Finals somehow, right? And unfortunately for the Mavs, because of the depth and the style that they play, they are kind of a one-trick pony right now, right? They don't have this metamorphosis type thing like the Warriors have. They don't have the changeup where they can go, okay, you know what we're going to do? We're just going to do twos, tons and tons of easy twos. We're going to take advantage of no rim protection for the Mavs, you know, blah, blah, blah. They don't have that other thing. Now, maybe that's something they can get over the next year or two, et cetera, and they become this team that is the 1 seed. Like, if you look at the landscape of the West, not to go all macro big picture, but like, if we think the Suns are coming down, you know, the Lakers aren't coming back next year, like, you know, I don't think to all of a sudden be a powerhouse. Like, Luka and the Mavs could be a year from now a number 1 seed, but they're going to need another trick, right? They're going to need something else to bring. But the point is, as bad as it is, when we look at it, we sit back and we go, oh, they're down 3-0. Like, yeah, that's true. And that's going to probably maybe affect how they play in game 4. But whatever they've done this point has allowed them to get the shots that they want to get. And even, as we mentioned, like, even though those shots are by Davis Bertans and by Reggie Bullock, they're still good enough shots and good enough shooters that they should be winning at least one of these games, if not all 3. And that's, you know, in the name of the NBA, when we sit here and we go, okay, like, you're going to win games if you make shots, you have to take it a step further backwards and go, okay, well, how do we make shots? Well, we create quality shots. And how do we play defensively? Well, we make them create, you know, bad shots. And the Mavs have been doing that, right? It's just a matter of, honestly, sample size. And the sample size is really good for Reggie Bullock in game 2. And it was really, really bad for him and Davis Bertans in game 3. But like, if they don't blow the lead in game 2, things are a lot different in this series. And I, you know, I'm looking at that game yesterday going like, okay, the Mavs are going to win this game as they sort of stretch out that, you know, 10-point lead in the first half. And it's like, okay, this is going to look a lot like the Sun series where the Mavs just play a lot better at home. And then, of course, they don't, because the Warriors have that second gear. And that's sort of the difference stylistically, where maybe this series wouldn't be all that close if the Warriors just tried to get into a 3-point shooting contest with the Mavs, right? The whole point is that they're not trying to get into a 3-point shooting contest with the Mavericks, right? And so, yeah, like, the Mavs are losing this 3-point shooting contest that they're playing with themselves, essentially, right? Like, they're the ones just firing away on their own, as the Warriors don't take nearly as many 3-pointers. So I know that doesn't really help us when it comes to, you know, game 4. It's more just like, all right, let's understand what we are seeing here, and that we are seeing, like, the Mavs are doing what they want to do. They are doing it well. They are just not executing it. Whereas the Warriors are, honestly, it's on guile at this point, where it's like, okay, we know we don't want to be involved in a 3-point shooting contest. Good news is we have another way to play this. Yeah. And by the way, they also have Steph Curry. And that really, really helps, right? Mm-hmm. Because, like, somehow we've gotten to a point where we're underrating Steph Curry and his general impact, and that we're honestly overrating a guy like Chris Paul and his general impact. And, like, I realize people are listening to me right now going like, wait, you think like Chris Paul is overrated? And it's like, yeah, because we're handing that guy trophies before these playoffs are even done. And I'm guilty of this. I'm refusing to believe in this Warriors team because I'm waiting for more out of a Klay Thompson. I'm waiting for more out of some of these other guys. And like, now they're getting it. They weren't necessarily getting it in the first 2 rounds. They had some pretty cushy matchups in those first 2 rounds, but now they're getting it. And like, kudos to them. I was, looking to back the Warriors in a short-term situation, not a long-term situation, because I didn't know that this was going to come, and it's ended up coming for them. And so kudos to them for being able to keep this going as long as they have.
Yeah. A couple of huge breaks for the Warriors in terms of, we talked about it after game 1, right? Like, after game 1 of this series, my whole thing was that the Mavs winning was more about the Suns, and the Suns just flopping as bad as you can flop in a game 7. And if you're the Warriors, you look up and you say your route to the NBA finals would be, we talked about this, right? Against Jokic and us, basically in round 1,
nothing else.
And then game 2, or series round 2, you're playing against the Grizz, and for half the series there's no Ja Morant, and they still push you to 6 games, like, you know. And then now you come in and you're facing the Mavs, who realistically, I know they had a really good regular season, but like, that was the second half of the season. And, you know, realistically though, nobody was fearing the Dallas Mavericks or thinking the Mavericks would make the conference finals. So it's very interesting, right? And like, history is never going to remember that. We're just going to look back on this season and think Warriors dynasty still going in 2022, and who would have thunk it, right? So that part of it is really cool to think about it in that sense. And Steph Curry, to me, what I'm seeing from Steph Curry is, I mean, this is going to sound stupid, but like, on par, if not, I'm more impressed with Steph Curry now than I was with Steph Curry on the Kevin Durant teams, right?
Yes.
Or like the teams, even that 72 win team, which I think that supporting cast doesn't get nearly as much credit for that 73 win team, right? I think that supporting cast deserves so much more credit when you go back and you think of like what they got from the Iguodalas of the world, the Sean Livingstons of the world, David Wests of the world, like those role players. It was strength in numbers, right? So watching what Steph Curry is doing, where he's giving them the nights, right? And talking mega trash to the bench and all that front running stuff. But like, I'm watching these games and I'm thinking, damn, I mean, do your thing, Steph. Like, it's insane watching what's been happening in this series so far. And the one thing I want to say about the Mavs though, right? And this is more so an overall NBA observation, I'll say, you know, we know that analytics has meant so much to the league and how we view the league and how it's changed the whole perception of the league in terms of we're going to try to shoot threes because threes are more valuable and that whole thing. But there's been this whole like kind of push back when you hear the Kevin Durant's talk, or like, you know, his blog boys thing that he had when he did the thing with the ringer and all that. And it's very interesting to me, right? Because we're still basing this. And I think if you're a mediocre team, you definitely give your team more of a chance to win games in the regular season. But the playoffs will still always come down to, can you get a bucket, period, whatever bucket that is, when you need one, right? And the math of that has only been disproven by the Warriors. And I think that has like messed up the line of thinking from everyone else, right? Because we're applying the math of like the greatest shooters of all time and then adding Kevin Durant to that team and using that as like, well, no, you can win a championship doing that. And it's like, yeah, but really only the Warriors have done that, right? Like when you needed other teams to when you go through the other teams, it's still like, yo, Kawhi needed a bucket and he's doing the mid-range thing. You know, even the Warriors with Kevin Durant at the end, like in that last year when they're beating LeBron, they needed KD. And KD was rocking the mid-range game, right? You know, like it's just very interesting that you have a team like the Mavs and the math will get you so far, but ultimately to win in the playoffs, can you win just jacking threes? And I don't know the answer to that past the Warriors.
Well, again, like it also, and that's kind of the point that I'm making, right? It's like, because I sort of disagree with your premise in that, like, you could point to Kevin Durant and be like, man, your best work came with the Warriors, who have an elaborate metrics department, advanced analytics department, right? And now he's shunned it to be like, hey, I like how Kyrie plays basketball. I like how he hoops. I'm going to go play with him. And it's like, yeah, okay. And then you can get a crappy coach and an organization that's kowtowing to those two guys, one of which who thinks the earth is flat. So like, respect to KD for being a 7-footer who can shoot and score and be a bucket, but like, it hasn't really got you anywhere other than when you're with the Warriors. Like, you played with Russ Westbrook and James Harden at all of your primes, and like, you made the finals, but like, then you played the Warriors, who weren't remotely as close to talented as you, and like they knocked you clear out, not out of the playoffs, out of existence, in that you all had to fracture and go in different ways. And so like, even though he's experienced like what it takes to play sort of, I'll say mathematically correct winning basketball, he's still passed on that and is now playing with Kyrie Irving and can't win a playoff game in the first round against like not exactly like the greatest team that we've ever seen. And like, yeah, you mentioned Kawhi and all of that stuff. And like, yeah, like it matters if you have like a really, really good player. And like, maybe Reggie Bullock isn't that dude, right? Maybe JJ Redick would be a better person to be in that spot because he's not going to go 0 for 10. And so, yeah, personnel matters. But my point is the plan gets them to a 58% win probability from a shot quality standpoint. But if that guy, whomever that is, Bullock, Bertans, me, or you, if that guy's not going to play even to his own average, right, to his own expectation, like we have to blame the player, right? We talk about this all the time in football. Like we're all pointing fingers at coaches and coaching decisions because you and I think we could be coaches. We go, yeah, we could have a headset and walk around on the sideline, but neither one of us have any sort of idea that we think we could be an NFL quarterback, a defensive player, NBA player, right? We can't even wrap our heads around the idea of doing that, but we think we could be the coach and we think we could put the plan together, even though we probably couldn't. Like we think that. And so we look at a guy like Bullock and be like, okay, maybe that guy just isn't it. And it's funny, like you mentioned, like the Warriors role players from those years past. Like if Reggie Bullock was Andre Iguodala, like the Mavs are probably leading in this series. I don't mean now Andre Iguodala, who's in a suit and who is probably headed for retirement here. I mean, the in prime, what an incredible benefit, right? To have Andre Iguodala as your sixth man, a guy who's a top 10 pick, like speaking of resume, right? A guy who was a 20 and 10 type of player for the Sixers, at the start of his career. Like the Mavs just don't have that right now. And that's my point. Like, I guess they've bet on Bullock. I don't know what Bullock's contract situation is, but like, if he can be replaced, if Bertans can be replaced with like guys who are just, and honestly, this is where like the metric kind of go out the window, like more clutch guys, like guys who are going to make those shots, then they pull off this upset as well, right? Yeah. And like just the fact that like, okay, these shots didn't go down for literally, a game and a half, right? From the second half onwards, like that's the difference between this being 2-1 potentially for the Mavs than it is 3-0. And of course, history is not going to look back and be like, well, the Mavs actually created like better shots than they gave up in that series. But like, Steph Curry, it has the clutch, right? He has the like falling into the bench 3-pointer shot that like even on his percentages season career long, he's not supposed to make, but he's making that shot in the Western Conference Finals because he's built that way. And like, that's the part of the non-metrics thing that like I respect. And like, we can go through it and it's like, yeah, if you're going to win a title, like you probably need to have the best player in the league or close to it. And so like, if the Warriors didn't have that, which by the way, like Kevin Durant was or close to the best player in the league, and they had Steph, and that's before even getting to Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and I'm still hanging on Andre Iguodala. Like, okay, who are the other teams that won titles? Like LeBron, whether it's bubble LeBron or Heat LeBron or Cavs LeBron. Like, we're not talking about it. We're talking like you're making a salient point in that, like, you're like, okay, we need. You can only go so far in the regular season and all of that sort of thing. But like, yeah, you also need like a top level talent. And Luka Doncic is that, right? Like Luka Doncic, if you won the title this year, like nobody would be sitting around and going like, can't believe they won with that guy as the number one, right? And if you look at Brunson and Dinwiddie and you look at their stats, and if you just took their name out of the equation, by the way, Jalen Brunson won College Player of the Year, right? He has reputation. He has those things on his resume. If you just looked at the numbers and were like, oh yeah, this guy had like 3 40-point games, and like, or this guy averaged like 20 points and like 8 assists, blah, 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 blah. You could assign him to a quote unquote better player, a more famous player, a more sort of renowned player. But like, we need to get beaten down with the idea that Jalen Brunson and Spencer Dinwiddie are actually pretty good. right? Like we need to see that for another year or maybe 2 more years. I don't know what it's going to take, because we can shift gears here to the Eastern Conference, and we probably should move on, because a guy I want to talk about is Jaylen Brown, because I'm watching that guy stumble all over himself, unable to even throw together 2 dribbles in a row. But like that guy gets all kinds of credit for being sort of part of a conceptual big 3 with the Celtics. And it's like, why is it because the Celtics had a big 3 10, 15 years ago that like we have already these ready-made slots that we need to put Jaylen Brown into, that we need to put Marcus Smart into? I just look, and I'm watching that game on Saturday night, and I'm like, does Jaylen Brown stink? Like, I realize this is a bad version of Jaylen Brown, but if we're going to spend 20 minutes beating up on Reggie Bullock, we should probably spend that amount on Jaylen Brown, a guy who is a high draft pick, a guy who gets all this credit for being like, oh, you can win. The Celtics can win the title because they have Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And it's like, I'm sorry, like Jaylen Brown's out here losing you games at this point in time. And he's a guy who's expected to win you games. Whereas some of those guys that we mentioned in the supporting cast of the Mavs are like, we're not asking a ton from them. And so like, I don't know what your take on all of this is, but I'm looking at it just going like, man, we are going a lot on rep with a lot of these guys. And there's a lot of guys who are disappointing me, even more so than a guy like Reggie Bullock.
We'll get back to the pod in a sec, but first, be a pro and win. Introducing DRF Sports all new premium data feature on drf.com/sports. For $99 a year, which is just $8.25 a month, you can get industry leading betting trends, angles, and analytics. With so many big sporting events here, it's the best way for you to make some money this postseason and have fun while doing it. That's DRF Sports Pro. Sign up now at drf.com/sports. Yeah, and there's a lot there. I think like it's tough, right? Like the NBA is such a weird thing because the one thing, you know, in the way that you can compare it to other sports, like the game of football doesn't necessarily change from the regular season to the playoffs. You know, like the NHL drastically changes from the regular season to the playoffs. The NBA is a different game as well in the playoffs because there's so many more intangibles involved in, like, you know, things that can't necessarily be measured, right? Like defenses play better in the playoffs because guys are just trying harder because it's the playoffs. Your better players are playing more because it's the playoffs. Your worst players are playing less because it's the playoffs. So there's all these different things where like we base these stats off of Reggie Bullock in the regular season, but then we get into the playoffs and like those shots that you were getting in the regular season aren't the same shots in the playoffs because they're more contested. You're going against a game plan that's a little bit different, right? Jaylen Brown, Jaylen Brown's, to me, he's
not even getting shots.
No,
he's dribbling twice and falling on the ground and turning the ball.
He dropped 40. Like they lost the game. He dropped 40 and really he can't dribble. Right. Like the Celtics, this is where like the Celtics main problem is like their point guard position. Right. And they were able to, you know, Marcus Smart did a great job when they finally, you know, went through Kyrie, they went through Kemba, they went through, what's my guy that ended up on the Hornets, Terry Rozier. Like they went through all these different guys and then just keeping Marcus Smart and deciding, okay, well, Marcus Smart's kind of settled into being our point guard, but he's still not really a point guard. And so the credit to the Heat and what happened in game 3 as we switch to the Eastern Conference here is that the Heat realized that the Celtics can't dribble, right? Like they don't really have a point guard. So if we just pressure them, we're going to force turnovers. Now, should that lead to 19 steals? No, that's an insane number of steals, right? Jaylen Brown had 7 turnovers in that game.
Yeah.
That's insane. But like, he dropped 40. He shot 14 of 20 in the game. Tatum was just horrible, was a horror show in that game. I think the thing with Jaylen Brown is more so that, you know, at a certain point when you have no point guard, everyone's kind of got to pick up a little bit of the slack in terms of bringing up the ball. And if you're the Heat, which we know, you know, one thing we give credit for Heat culture is obviously Spo and the game plans that these guys draw up and the little things that they're able to pick up on and exploit. And one of those things is definitely ball pressure. We're going to, you know, if Tatum's going to bring up the ball, then we're going to ride him all the way up the floor. And clearly, I guess that tired him out a bit. You know, PJ Tucker he's not enjoying the PJ Tucker experience in game 3 for sure. Right. Marcus Smart, he's not an actual point guard. We're going to make his life a little more difficult riding him up the floor. And you're going to get a lot of turnovers. Right. And I mean, the Boston Celtics, that was still one of the weirdest games I've ever seen. Like, I don't really have much of an explanation in terms of what happened in that game 3, because it was like crazy scoring runs / scoring droughts. You had injuries like Jimmy Butler not playing the entire second half. And you would think the Celtics should be able to win that game. But then they have their own injuries and then returns from injuries. And then there's all these reviews and steals and turnovers. And, you know, if anyone were to tell you that PJ Tucker would hold Tatum to 10 points while outscoring him with 17 points, right? Like, find me the person that predicts that as a thing that would happen, right? So it's just super strange looking at that game. And that's where, again, like, I don't know how many things like a stat's going to tell you about, you know, Kyle Lowry making those. Like, Kyle Lowry, you look at his stats and you're going to think, I don't know what he really did in that game. But in crunch, like to start the game, he changed the whole forecast for the Heat because he was getting out and pushing the ball and pushing the pace. And Raptors fans will remember the emergence of Siakam was him running the floor and Lowry finding him on the outlet pass and just getting easy baskets. And that's one thing that he did at the start of that game for Miami to really get them out and get them going, like just pushing the ball, pushing the pace. So you look at his stat line and says 11 points, 6 assists, 4 steals. And it's like, okay, that's all right. But like pushing the pace at the start of the game. And then at the end of the game, he came up with that big steal to kind of ice it to find Strauss for the layup. He also was the one in the huddle that said, hey, we need to run this play, get the pin down for Strauss, find Strauss. Strauss knocks down a 3. And it's like, those are things that I don't know where the stat is to tell us that that's going to happen in an NBA playoff game.
And that's, right? That's my point. Like, from a basketball standpoint, like, it isn't just all in the box score, right? Like, people need to understand the difference between the box score and metrics, right? So I look at Jaylen Brown, it's like, yeah, man, you turn the ball over 7 times. I would venture to guess all of those were live ball turnovers that basically immediately led to a layup on the other end. But there's also like this, you know, the voodoo element, if you will, of like momentum and the crowd just being like, man, you guys, you turned it over again.
I can tell you at least 4 of them. I'd say, because Victor Oladipo had 4 steals, and I know Oladipo came in and there was at least like 3 plays straight where Oladipo just stripped him and it was just bad.
And at what point in the game are these happening, right? And then all of these are happening at the point where you're trying to come back and you're very close to coming back. Now, he scores 40 points, but like, we always get, you know, sort of drunk on the idea of like somebody putting up 40 points or 50 points or something like that, right? Like, but if they're not doing it on the other end, or they are a detriment on a handful or significant amount of offensive possessions as well, like, somebody has to score the points, right? Like, you're going to, you know, even the worst team is going to score 80 points in a basketball game. Somebody's going to do that. And yeah, we should point the finger at Jason Tatum for turning the ball over 6 times as well, and only scoring 10 points, as you mentioned, right? And being out PJ Tuckered in that game. But like, we've already built up this sort of thing with Jason Tatum, in that we have seen peak Jason Tatum, but this is now the second time, and you and I talked about this, like, this is a second time that we've seen just a really bad Jason Tatum game. Yeah. But because the highs are so high, we give him credit that we're like, oh, he'll be better next time. And it doesn't look necessarily as bad. And of course, he gets hurt and he's writhing on the ground, and like, he comes back, and like, it's just like you're mentioning, as far as like the injuries, it's like hard to keep up. And I don't know who's even going to play in this next game between Butler, Brown, Smart's in and out. Like, you know, obviously Lowry's fine. Like, Lowry's healed, right? You talked about how he'd been hobbled in the 2 games that he played, and all of a sudden he's healed. But it's like, who do you feel better about from that game? Because like, Jaylen Brown had 40 points, but like, that's just the one thing in the one column. Kyle Lowry, I think, played the better game as far as, well, at least as far as expectations are concerned, right? And again, when it comes to the team, it comes to betting, and it comes to individuals, everything is relative to expectations, right? Like, I'm not saying like Jaylen Brown stinks like as a basketball player. I'm saying, is that like the worst 40-point game you could possibly have? Because as I'm watching that game, I'm just going like, I'm kind of amazed that he is making these baskets because of how often and how easy it looked for the Heat to turn him and Jason Tatum over. I should, like, again, like, have to mention that. And I'm sitting here again, like we should frame it within the context of betting here. We crushed it in game 2 with the Celtics plus 3.5 on the money line. We're all over the market move in that game, right? I talked about how I rather bet the idea that this game is going to close Heat -1. And sure enough, it closes Heat -1 once Horford and Smart were announced back in in the series. So going forward here, we see it's 6.5 point spread in game 3, which I was like, okay, that's too many. I'm going to sit here and hold my Celtics series price. And it's still 6.5. So as we go into game 4 here, Shell, like, are you looking at this going like, man, that was such an outlier on a bunch of different levels that like the Celtics, the fact that was a 1-point game, given all of the sort of chaos that was going on with that game, are you looking at this going, okay, that was a weird game, I'm betting the Celtics -6.5, or are you looking to take the points with the Heat?
I'm going to take the points with the Heat. And the reason I'm going to take the points with the Heat is just because, like, even if the Celtics, like, I think the Celtics win the game, I just think the Heat cover. And the weird thing about Miami and watching that game is somehow they just found a way. And it might not have been the way that I thought. Like, I was kind of wondering, okay, where's Tyler Hero? And they mentioned that he's kind of banged up. And Spo post game, it's like the Heat are struggling to score, and Tyler Hero's on the bench, and there's no Jimmy Butler. And it's like, wait, what's going on here? And they asked Spo straight up, like, was it more about his injury or about the fact that he was struggling? And Spo was honest. He's like, actually, it was a bit of both. So it's still kind of weird because it's like, oh, so that means that he could have played, but you were just like, nah, right? Like, let's ride it out with Lowry and Strus. And it's just like, it looked horrible down the stretch, right? But somehow, some way, this Heat team was able to pull out this improbable victory that made absolutely no sense, right? And so whether it's like they're hanging on and trying to figure out, oh no, the play that we're going to make here is not go to Bam in a clutch spot. We're going to run a pin down for Max Strus, right? And that's just like and it's Kyle Lowry drawing up that play in the huddle. Right. So it's like all of these things where we talk about Heat culture and all that stuff. Like, I know it sounds cliche and it sounds crazy and it sounds silly, but there's no reason for the Miami Heat to win that game. Right. At the start of the game with Jimmy Butler in the game. Now you tell me the second half is here and there's no Jimmy Butler and somehow they just find a way. So it's like, okay, give me the 6.5 points. I'll take the Heat plus 6.5. But I feel like the Celtics should win this game. They can't go down 3-1 going back to Miami, you would think.
You'd think. I'm not going to play the spread. Like, how I'm going to do it is basically the series price is back down to Boston -105. I'm going to play that because I'm not worried about the road games, in Miami. I think Boston has a very legitimate chance of winning a game 7 in Miami. We obviously we know, right, what those point spreads are going to be. We know that's going to be a -1, situation, right? If everybody's healthy. And by the way, Jimmy Butler was the one who didn't play in the second half of that game. So to me, he's the one more, if you say, okay, what's going to change between now and a prospective game 7? The guy closest to not playing right now is Jimmy Butler. As much as Smart and Tatum are like in and out of the lineup, right? Like, Jimmy Butler is the one who was literally out of the lineup. And like Tyler Hero, obviously an element too, where he's just got the world's largest ice pack on his quad in the second half of that game. And so if we fast forwarded to a game 7, like the worst case scenario, I shouldn't say worst case, because like, what if one of the Celtics main guys are out? But like the most likely scenario is Miami -1. And so if you can get right now the Celtics -105 to win the series, you're not giving up a ton if this goes to a game 7.
Yeah.
There's also a possibility the Celtics just win the rest of the games, right? Like, they're favored by 6.5 in game 4, which tells me they're probably going to be favored around 6.5 in game 6. And then in between, they have one game in Miami where they just literally blew out the Heat like 3 days ago. So I'm way more in on just betting the series price and having the Celtics win, 3 out of the next 4 games than I am, okay, I want you to win this game, but I also need you to win it by 7 points. Coming off of a game where, clean up an aisle 3 over here, like, the Heat did win the shot quality battle. And again, when we're talking about role players, right? Like, if Reggie Bullock is on the Heat, right? Like Max Strus didn't go 0 for 10, right? But if before the series or before the even season started or the postseason started, you said, okay, like who's more likely to go 0 for 10, Max Strus or Reggie Bullock, like we'd be like, I don't know, either one of them, like it's 50-50. Like we don't know. Like, I guess Strus is a better shooter. Maybe we're sort of painting him with that, but like Bullock is making shots in the previous game. So like these, like the Heat just have those guys who made the shots. Now maybe Max Strus has that clutch element to him, and maybe it's just Max Strus on 4 different playoff teams for the next 12 years of his career. And we're like, look at this guy just constantly making shots in the playoffs, right? Like this is the early stages of that. Maybe it isn't. So that's how I'm going to play it. I still think the Celtics win this series after slandering them for, well, honestly, what was a sorry performance in game 3. Yeah, I think they bounce back. I think you're right. They win this game. I also think you're right in that like 6.5 for a series that, relatively low total at 207.5. Shot quality had it under. The game ended up going over because obviously things got a little crazy towards the end there.
Oh yeah, it just went over, right?
Yeah. So,
took a couple of reviews there. Took like a late 3 from, I think, Nick Stauskas. Like it was weird at the end getting that over.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the under would still be the play there, but for me, this is a longer term, medium term thing with regards to the Celtics on the series price.
Yeah. And the one thing to remember for anyone, whatever the bet is that you're about to place on this Heat Celtics series, I'd wait until you find out who is actually playing. And, the tough part might be to like in-game some stuff here because, Jimmy Butler might play.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that he's going to play like the Jimmy Butler we saw that dropped 40 in game 1. Yeah. Right. And that's going to be the toughest part to try to like analyze throughout the rest of this series, because guys might be in the lineup, but they're actually, he's just going to, like, Jimmy Butler, I'm assuming, is going to try to play in this game. Right. Yeah. But like, that doesn't mean that he's going to be, that's going to be, the A++ Jimmy Butler we're getting. And again, Kyle Lowry, I don't even think he was the A++ Kyle Lowry. Like, he checked out of the game in the first quarter and went to the back to get on the bike, to like stay on the bike to keep the hammy loose and all that fun stuff. So like how that plays out is interesting. The other thing is Robert Williams. Robert Williams didn't play for the Celtics in game 3. And, maybe this matters, maybe it doesn't, but it just coincided with Bam going off in game 3, right? And so how different did Bam look when he didn't have to go against a front line of Robert Williams and Al Horford, right? What are the Celtics really doing with Robert Williams? Like, did he really just play a lot because they weren't sure about Al Horford? And is he kind of still in this like play in case of emergency type thing with Al Horford, and what was going on with the COVID stuff, but mainly they want to kind of keep resting him as his knee gets better. Like that's another very interesting part of this series, because when the Celtics had Al Horford and Robert Williams both playing, it didn't look good for the Miami Heat because they weren't able to get the easy baskets going to the hoop as they were when it's not Robert Williams in there and it's Tice, or it's just, an Al Horford front line. So a lot of things, just keep your eye out on the injuries. And if Jimmy Butler's knee is swelling one day, I don't know if 2 days later he's going to be out there dropping 40. Like if he is, cool, more power to him, right? Yeah. The Jimmy Butler playoff Jimmy folklore continues, cool. But we'll see about that. So again, to kind of just recap that as we go into game 4s in this series, I'm going to be on the Warriors +1, and I'll be on the Heat +6.5. Trying to see if the run can continue here, coming off a 2-0 pod last week. But as we keep things going, because we'll try to, I know we're at the hour mark here on this pod, or at least past the hour mark, but we're trying to get to some NHL here. And, I know there's a lot going on in the NHL, but how can you tell me just what do I need to know here from the NHL and what's sticking out to you the most? I know the Battle of Alberta is still rocking and still cooking, and everyone's fallen in love with Connor McDavid. It's like Americans are just now becoming more aware of who Connor McDavid is, the Connor McDavid experience.
I guess, or Connor McDavid is just taking it to like yet another level. And honestly, like we just did an hour on the NBA, and like that's credit to the NBA that we could somehow do an hour on the NBA, where meanwhile the NHL is more wildly entertaining and actual, from an actual watching the game standpoint. Yeah, you mentioned Battle of Alberta last night, game 3. The Oilers are just so fun. Like they, obviously winning is fun. If you bet on a team and they win, like you're going to have a pretty good time. But when they score goals, the way that they score goals, like it just leaves you going like, this is, this isn't even playoff hockey, right? Like the playoff hockey is like, oh, it's supposed to go off 3 guys' legs and into the net, or we're supposed to just barrel into the goaltender, which is happening in every series at this point. In this case, it's sick goal after sick goal for the Oilers. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you the Oilers are the better team. They just have a transcendent player, the best hockey player I've ever seen in my life. And yes, that includes Wayne Gretzky. We can have that conversation offline if you like. The Connor McDavid effect, man. Everyone on the Oilers sees what he does and goes like, oh, like that's possible. And so there are goals being scored that he's not necessarily even setting up, but they sort of look like something that he would do. And Evander Kane literally had a goal or 2 goals that looked identical. And one of them came from a pass from Leon Draisaitl, and one of them came from a pass from Connor McDavid. But the point is like the Draisaitl pass was actually like the sweeter pass, because all of these guys look around and go like, oh man, we can make these plays. Like we can't make all of the plays that Connor McDavid does, like this pirouette, like double leg kick reception of a pass to himself that he did yesterday to set himself up to set another guy up. Like that was outrageous. Again, I'm giggling when I'm watching some of these plays that he makes both in games 1 and game 2, but everyone on the Oilers is just like, they're better because he's on the ice, because he's setting them up. But I think his attitude and what he does on the ice, like it permeates to the other guys and they think they can make these plays. Meanwhile, there was a great job done on the broadcast, the Canadian broadcast yesterday in the intermission, talking about the Flames. It's like football, right? Where they're double covering the wide receiver that somebody else like leaks out of the backfield, or the tight end's wide open. The Flames are staring at Connor McDavid anytime he's anywhere near the offensive zone, to the point where they were leaving guys wide open in front of the net. And so when you add that in, like that's more than just the regular, sort of analytics matchup thing that we do, right? Like that is this added thing where like, okay, we can take a season's worth of information, but if the Flames are going to be so drawn to Connor McDavid that they're leaving guys wide open in front of the net, that's like a different deal. Now, yesterday's games from a metric standpoint, expected goals, high danger chances, very even. Problem is, right, this is like a shot quality type thing. When Connor McDavid is on the ice and whether he's getting them or whether he's setting them up, those shots, those high danger chances, the quality of them is really, really good. So you have Evander Kane making moves all alone in front of the net, right? This isn't like, oh, it's a rebound, like quick. Oh, we got to make a move real quick here. This is like, I got all the time in the world here to make a move to the backhand on this goaltender, right? So that's what he's bringing. It's like there should be another, instead of high danger chances, like high danger shot quality stat that is just like, man, can you believe the chances when they get them? Can you believe how good these chances are for the Oilers? So again, I've talked about how like I have Oilers in the series, Oilers plus 1.5 in this, in the series spread, if you will. We added to that after game 1. No reason not to keep going back to the well here. This game in Edmonton, game 4, is a pick'em. It's lined as a pick'em. That's a fair number, right? Like the Flames have been creating their scoring chances too at an even or slightly better rate than the Oilers. But your guy, Mike Smith, came through big time yesterday. Like he was awesome. He was awesome in the previous game after lasting about 7 seconds in that first game. Teams that are not so awesome, the Florida Panthers. Like what an absolute flop out. And if you can flop out of the second round, the Florida Panthers are doing that. And so what did we ask of the Florida Panthers against the Tampa Bay Lightning, Shell? Just don't take penalties, man. Tampa Bay is lethal on the power play. And we even thought that, okay, maybe if you did take penalties, it wouldn't be that bad because Tampa hasn't had that power play this season, right? We talked about last year, 40% in that series last season. What do we ask? Don't take penalties. Guess what? They've taken penalties. 4 of 11 on the power play, 36% for the Lightning on the power play. And that wouldn't be that bad, except for up until this past game 3, Florida had yet to score in the entire playoffs a power play goal. They were 0 for 24 at one point. And so you look at a team and you go, okay, like, well, Florida Panthers are just a regular season team, blah, 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 blah. And like, sure. And yet they were disappointing even in a 6-game series victory against the Washington Capitals. But the thing from a predictive standpoint, we've talked about the difference between even strength and power play and special teams and all that sort of thing. Was there anything that would be predictive about Florida going 0 for 24 on the power play? No, of course not. Right? Like, why would you predict the best team in the league, the President's Trophy winners, to go 0 for 24 on that stretch on the power play? That's not a predictive thing. That's an outlier, right? So they go and they get finally a power play goal, and like they might as well have had a parade at that point. But unfortunately for them, the even strength stuff isn't working out all that great. And so right now the metrics for this season for the 3 games that they've had are Florida 6.54 expected goals at even strength, Tampa Bay 6.24. The high danger chances are 25-25 at even strength. But Florida is down 3-0. This is the Mavericks Warriors series all over again, but the hockey version, right? These are 50-50 from a quality chance creation standpoint. But Tampa, and again, this is where we get all locked up in the experience and the grit and the grind and all the stuff that we talked about with regards to Tampa going against Toronto. Or the Warriors going against Dallas. Like, there's something extra. And that's where Tampa is, being able to take advantage of whatever extra there is. Because this percentage on the power play, that is the difference in this series, by the way, isn't predictable. Even in the regular season, it was 27% against Florida. So if you're saying, okay, it's a bad matchup, Florida just can't kill a penalty against Tampa Bay, like, 27%, that means 1 less goal. And in these games that have by and large been 1-goal games, now technically this last one was a 4-goal game, and even sort of less technically, it was a 3-1 game. But like, the power play is the thing that has gotten Florida in this hole. They could have won those first 2 games, but they have been giving up these power play goals. And if they had given up 1 less power play goal in either one of those games, they probably have a lot better chance of winning this series. And of course, game 2 comes down to 3 seconds left, and your man's Mackenzie Weegar, I know you're excited to talk about Mackenzie Weegar, he gets blown out of the water in defensive coverage. For some reason, he's chasing a guy behind the net with 4 seconds to go, leaving a guy wide open to score that game-winning goal with 3 seconds left. Like, Mackenzie Weegar needs to get shot into the sun at this point. So fortunately, they're close to the sun and sunrise. As far as game 4 is concerned, we see this line move to Florida plus 105. It's very rare that I call for the 1-2-3 Cancun in hockey. It's just not how these guys are wired, right? Like, they don't. But like, I gotta stop, right? I gotta stop betting Florida. I stopped betting Florida after game 2, because even though we were getting basically an even money, pick 'em type price here on Florida for game 3, at some point you have to believe what this team is. And so why wouldn't I bet them in game 3? Why won't I bet them in game 4? Because the line is minus 110, and I have to look at the Panthers the way they are now, and they are about even against Tampa Bay. They are about even against Washington. They aren't the team from the regular season piling up the metrics that would tell me that they should be favored, that tell me that they should be, 56, 57% to win these games. I got to eventually believe them after 9 games of just not really showing me anything. So I'm a pass on this series.
Yeah. No, I totally got you, man. And it's been super crazy to see what else is going on in the NHL. And it's been an interesting run for sure. I know that there's tons more that the people want to know in terms of what's going on with you and what your takes are on the NHL playoffs as they continue to go on. Same thing for the NBA playoffs and whatever else you might be tossing out, because, the information is aplenty. Where can the people find that information from you, my dude?
Yeah, well, let's quickly give out a play here for these next couple of games. Carolina is plus 100 in game 4 on Tuesday. We're betting that. We're betting them -1.5 on the series because that price is back down to -130. And you're going, oh, I don't know, man. Like the Rangers, these games have been close. The Rangers just won in game 3. The metrics for that game: 3.39 expected goals for at even strength for Carolina. They only scored 1. 2.04 for the Rangers. And of course they scored 2. 17-8 in the high danger chance category at even strength. That was a Shesterkin game in game 3. I'm high on this Carolina team, especially against this Ranger team. That's a play for me, both in the series pricing and in the game. And then St. Louis and Colorado needs to be mentioned because the Blues bounced back in game 2. And we talked about this idea that like, it's a really interesting concept, right? Because most of the time the underdog, you know what you're going to get from the team and you need the goaltender to steal it. And that's the X factor, right? The goaltender is the variable. Well, we came into this series going like, I'm pretty sure Jordan Binnington's playing really good hockey right now. And what we've seen is the actual team in front of him has been the variable that has been sort of, up and down, obviously way down in game 1 and much better in game 2 and game 3. Well, of course, your boy Nazem Kadri goes in, wipes out Jordan Binnington. Now he's out for the entire playoffs. And so it's this weird situation where now the variable is now back in goal here with Ville Husso, who started the postseason as the starting goaltender. So is it some big disaster? Of course, the answer is, I don't know, because the Blues right now are the same price in game 4 as they were in game 3 with Husso in net. The reason for that is, okay, if we just get a little bit less good, goaltending, but we get the same Blues effort that we've seen over these past 2 games. Now, is it a coincidence that Binnington goes out and the Blues are up 1-0 in that game and the Blues then lose that game? Probably not, right? Like that's the unfortunate part because now the calculus has changed for us. So I'm a little bit less apt to start backing St. Louis. We're hoping they get one more to cash our over 5.5. So these are the things that I'm sweating out that we'll be able to talk about on Twitter at MRussAuthentic. We had a fun day yesterday tweeting about golf. I had a Formula One theory that I had ready for you, but we'll have to save that for another day because I know we're tight for time. So yeah, lots going on with the NHL. We'll be tweeting out all of that good stuff. We'll have some evaluations of these series after game 4 that I'll be writing for the Score here later on this week. Unfortunately for the Florida Panthers, the evaluation might be that they are already out of the playoffs.
Tough times for the Florida Panthers. Indeed, the President's Trophy winners on the ropes for sure. We'll see where that picks up, and we'll check back in later on during this week. Thanks again for stopping by, my dude. We'll catch up soon.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
And if you want to follow me online, you can do so on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander and on Twitter at Shell Alexander. Don't forget to like and subscribe to DRF Sports Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also rate us, review us, like us, all that other fun stuff. But for more from this new project from DRF Sports, just a little reminder. If you're unfamiliar with the letters DRF, it stands for Daily Racing Forum, which has been around for over 100 years, giving you all of the horse racing information, data, and analysis. But now we've taken over the entire sports world. So if you want coverage on every football game, as well as the NBA, MLB, college sports, and more, head to drf.com/sports for all of the details and insights, as the site has all of the data on every game, including offensive and defensive stats, betting angles, line movements, key injuries, team stats, and more. The DRF data is what powers our power trends. So if you want to see which trends our analysts have selected, follow us on Instagram and on Twitter. If you want access to all of the raw data, drf.com/sports. That's where you can find the usual previews as we deep dive into the games. And of course, we got you covered on this podcast. However you want your betting information, we've got you covered. Again, my name is Sheldon Alexander. That's all I got for now. But until next time, see ya.
Thanks for listening to the DRF Sports Podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show. For more sports betting advice, go to drf.com/sports and follow on Twitter at DRF_sports.